Today, the Pope at the White House, Ben Carson and Muslims in the White House, and what are the best Bible translations? This is Free Range Q&A with Al Cresta. Welcome to this edition of Free Range Q&A with Al Cresta. I'm Nick Tom, a little vocally challenged this week, along with Al Cresta. Let's get started.
All right.
Cindy in Toledo, Ohio says, I am pro-life and was discouraged by Pope Francis's unwillingness to speak on behalf of the unborn when he spoke at the White House. He keeps talking about climate change. What do you say?
Well, in fact, we're recording this the very day this happened. So I've read the Pope's speech. I've read the President's speech. I think pro-life people are going to be very disappointed in what he said. Or actually what he didn't say. It's not so much what he said, it's what he didn't say. The Pope is our visible sign of unity. And John Paul II and Benedict XVI, their social doctrine was almost exactly the same as Pope Francis's.
Right.
But whenever they spoke on these matters, they tried to balance left and right. So, for instance, in this case, we know that Pope Francis and the President agree on climate change, all right? But we know they disagree on same-sex so-called marriage. We know that they agree on Cuba and lifting the embargo. Yep. We know they disagree on abortion. I have no problem with the Holy Father bringing up the wide range of topics.
Sure.
But I do think that pro-life people in America who've been working very hard feel as though they've been sucker punched.
Yeah.
And I don't think he knows that. I'll not tell you why. No pastor of any merit would permit his people to feel so disappointed if he knew that he could change it with just a sentence or two. Yep. And so that's what I think. I think it was a bad, from a public relations point of view, I don't think it was useful.
Yep. Very good. Next, we have Jason from Peoria, Illinois, who emailed his question to freerange@avemariaradio.net. Was Ben Carson wrong to say he wouldn't advocate for a Muslim to be in charge of this nation, to be president? Isn't he pandering to the extreme, racist, anti-immigrant faction of the Republican Party?
No, to both questions, in fact. I met Ben Carson for the first time probably 20 years ago when he was at a fundraiser for an urban, inner city ministry focusing on the education for black youth. It was a stunning speech. I remember it to this day. Ben Carson grew up in very deprived circumstances and went on to become, of course, the genius pediatric neurosurgeon at Johns Hopkins University, one of the world's most prestigious medical institutes. This fellow doesn't have a racist or cynical bone in his body. Yeah. I'd like to point something out, too. He was, I thought, a bit clumsy and a bit imprecise, but
sure.
Americans do disagree with him. All the polls that are being taken indicate that, you do these man-on-the-street interviews, people disagree. They say things like, well, Muslims are human too.
Yep.
So why would so many Americans disagree with Ben Carson? The real reason is they know nothing about Islam, and Ben Carson does.
Yep.
So almost everyone involved in these recent polls about Carson and Muslims assume that race, ethnicity, religion, gender has no bearing on qualifications for office.
Yep.
And normally that's true. We kind of pride ourselves on equal opportunity, and it is one of the great things about America. We champion equal opportunity. So this is not about Muslims as people. This is what's important. This is about Islam as a religious, political, theological, and social system. There's a huge difference between the two. It does appear that taking Islam seriously means the First Amendment is out the window. There are about 50 Muslim countries in the world today, Muslim-dominated countries. Not a single one of them has religious liberty as we understand it. You cannot go into these countries as a missionary and work without all kinds of restrictions or be threatened with death. So let's remember that. Islam has never produced a government of the people, by the people, or for the people. Well, some people might say that, look, we used to say this about Catholicism. During the 1960 presidential race, atheists like Avro Manhattan and Paul Blanchard and Protestant preachers like Norman Vincent Peale claimed that John F. Kennedy was not fit to be president of the United States because he was a Catholic. Isn't this the same thing? No, it's not the same thing, and I'll tell you why. That was based on a serious misreading of the Catholic tradition. Kennedy died in 1963. 2 years later, the Second Vatican Council formally clarified the Church's position on religious liberty and on democracy. So it was understood that this had been a misreading of the tradition. Many Protestants used it for the last 400 years, but it was wrong. We also know that Jesus said, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar, and render unto God the things that are God's. Right in the Gospels, we see a distinction being made between, you might say, spiritual governance and civil governance. So we've always had these distinctions. In the High Middle Ages, for instance, at the height of papal power, we always distinguished between pope, bishop, king, prince. We always distinguish between the power of the altar and the power of the throne. The point is, Islam sees itself as having a mission to create kingdom on earth. Christianity knows that that kingdom will not be brought in its fullness until the return of Jesus. Islam is about bringing the worlds and the nations under Islamic law. That's the measure for success. And if you can't be a president of the United States if that's your goal. So what we could say is, I guess you could have a Muslim president in the United States as long as he was a bad Muslim. And I don't like to encourage that kind of thing. So we should encourage reform where we see it, but we should not be wearing rose-colored glasses when Christians around the world in 2015 are losing their lives at the hands of Muslim revolutionaries and political leaders.
Yeah. On this topic, I might want to mention that Robert in Detroit says, Al, are there any good sources explaining differences between Bible translations? I have someone pushing the KJV as the only true translation.
Yeah, this is funny that people get excited about a 17th century English translation of the Bible. If the King James was good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me, right?
Sure.
So there's a great book by Donald Carson, D.A. Carson, called The King James Version Debate, A Plea for Realism. Carson is an outstanding evangelical Protestant New Testament scholar. It's probably the best single piece I can recommend for dealing with this King James Version thing. As far as Bible translations go, it's good to distinguish between Bible translations that are reliable for study and those translations which just are stylistically more readable. Okay. So Catholics, for instance, have what we use in the liturgy, which is the New American Bible,
right.
And we also have the bishops have signed off on the Revised Standard Version, and now the New Revised Standard Version. The New Revised Standard Version has more inclusive language than the old Revised Standard Version. The bishops have also given a clean bill of health to what they call today's English version and what's called the contemporary English version. And of course, there's the old Douay Rheims too, which goes back even before the King James, and it was modified in the 20th century. I think the early 20th century. So that's another viable translation for Catholics, very popular among more traditionalist Catholics. The big thing to remember about Bible translations is the most important test for getting a Bible is the one you'll read. So all of this stuff about dynamic equivalence or accuracy in literal translation means nothing if you don't read it. It's good to have a good study Bible, and it's good to have a few that are very popularly read. You want something that reads like a well-written editorial, okay? I like the New Jerusalem. It's a Catholic translation. For that, it has other problems, so I don't use it for study. I like J.B. Phillips' New Testament for Modern Man, which is more like a paraphrase than a translation. But for what I recommend for Catholic study, Revised Standard Version, I think that's the most reliable.
Just read it, right?
Just read it. Don't talk about it.
Thank you very much for those answers, Al. We want you to participate in the next edition of Free Range Q&A. Please just email freerange@avemariaradio.net. That's freerange@avemariaradio.net. Or leave your questions at Facebook or on Twitter. We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us.